Well, welcome everyone to the Newburyport Literary Festival. My name is Jennifer Entwistle, and I am the co-director of the festival. This is our 17th year of bringing authors and readers together, and it's our third as a virtual event. Let's get started. I want to introduce our speakers. Charlotte McConaghy is the author of the novels Migrations, a national bestseller that's being translated into over 20 languages, and the New York Times bestseller, Once There Were Wolves. She is joining us from Australia. So welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you.
We also have Rebecca Scherm with us. She's the author of two novels, A House Between Earth and the Moon and Unbecoming. She's a graduate of the MFA program at the University of Michigan and now lives in Palo Alto, California with her family. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me.
And last but not least, Julie Carrick Dalton. Her debut novel, Waiting for the Night Song, was named to most anticipated 2021 book lists by many platforms, including CNN, Newsweek, USA Today, and BuzzFeed. Her second novel, The Last Beekeeper, will be released in early 2023. She's a member of the Climate Fiction Writers League and is a frequent speaker and workshop leader on the topic of fiction in the age of climate crisis. She's a mom to 4 kids and 2 dogs, and she farms a piece of land in rural New Hampshire, although she is joining us from Edinburgh, Scotland tonight. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. I'm so excited to be here tonight. I'm really grateful to the festival, to the Newburyport Literary Festival, for keeping these conversations going during the pandemic. It's been a way to keep our community together and keep these conversations going. And I'm thrilled to be here with 2 authors that I admire so much, Rebecca and Charlotte. So as I was preparing this conversation, it's getting hot in here. Climate change in fiction. There's so much to talk about. I came across a magazine or an article in Time magazine, and the headline was, "Imagine if Hollywood actually made realistic climate stories." And it got me thinking, because we see all these disaster stories on big screen that involve climate, but not a lot of smaller stories. We see that, these big movies like Don't Look Up and The Day After Tomorrow, and they usually involve disasters. And as I was reading, it said that 2.8% of film scripts in the last 5 years have even acknowledged climate change. And I am a little bit biased, but I think that we novelists are doing a way better job. We are bringing it into all sorts of stories in science fiction, in young adult, in romance, in literary fiction. And I have 2 authors here with me today who've written some really amazing stories. They're really different, but they're tackling big topics and personal relationships and how we're negotiating living in a changing world. So I thought that we should maybe start by introducing the audience to your books a little bit. For those who haven't read them, maybe tell a very short description of the characters, the setting, and then we'll start unpacking your relationship to the climate themes in your book. So I'm going to start with Charlotte because her book happens to be set in the Scottish Highlands, where I am right now. So I've been thinking a lot about your book this week. So Charlotte, can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure, yes. I'm very jealous that you're in the Highlands at the moment. I would love to be there. So it's the story of Inti Flynn, who is a biologist who's been tasked with reintroducing 14 grey wolves back into the Scottish Highlands in order to rewild the landscape there and kind of rejuvenate the ecosystem. She's facing a lot of pushback from the locals because it's a densely farmed community. And they're frightened of the impact of a predator on their livestock and their lives. And then Inti comes across the mauled body of a farmer, and she knows that the wolves are going to be blamed. So she kind of makes a very reckless decision to bury the body and sets out to discover who the real killer is. So there's obviously a murder mystery there. It's also, there's a love story. It's a story of family, nature, healing, trauma. Ultimately, I think it's a story about not just rewilding landscapes, but also rewilding ourselves too.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. And Rebecca, do you want to tell us a little bit about A House Between Earth and the Moon?
Sure. A House Between Earth and the Moon is about 2033. And that's not far from now at all. And it's 2033, how it looks on the ground and how it looks from space when you can't get home. In this case, it's a private space station that's a bolt hole for billionaires to flee climate change, the climate change that they have helped to create, and the very human people they have hired to build that space station for them. There's Tess, who is a young social psychologist trying to work for big tech and use her powers for good. And there's Alex, who is a biochemist trying to create a gene-modified species of algae that will capture more carbon when he unleashes it. His daughter was a teenager, Mary Agnes, and living in a teenager in 2033, and these sister tycoons of the giant telecom who own the station and own the technology that is running our lives at this time, and a mother who feels totally ill-equipped to raise her children in 2033. Not me, but that's where she comes from. So it's about sort of the intersection between the climate crisis as we feel it every day and as we perceive it in terms of disasters around us creeping ever closer to home, and personal technology that helps us evade or postpone action with its promises of safety and convenience, and the delusions of heroism of trying to solve these problems individually when really people have to work together.
Oh, I love both of your descriptions, and these books are so different, and they're really tackling, you know, like a small one specific ecosystem and the wolves, and then this broad lens of looking at our whole planet and society, and I love that we can have this conversation together. And I'm curious for both of you, what was the inspiration for the story? Was it an article you read? Was it something you studied or a place you visited that launched this idea? So, Rebecca, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So I put my hand up when I mentioned Meg, the mother in my book. I started this book because when I was pregnant with my first child, and I was freaking out. I was absolutely miserable with anxiety and also a kind of guilt that I was going to bring someone into this world knowing what I did about how the future with the climate and with billionaires and guns, sort of my three most pressing concerns at that time, how it was looking. And so I thought I could just work through those anxieties a little bit by writing a gigantic novel for 7 years. You know, through another child, 2 babies, moves across the country, etc. But it was really me trying to imagine the future that my own children will grow up in, and not the, you know, the far-flung future, which is in some ways more abstract to imagine and easier to imagine because we can just make it all up. But the future that exists when we draw a line from now, 12 years into the future. And I couldn't stop thinking about the climate at that point. I lived in Michigan, and climate change was still very abstract to me at that time. But then we moved to California as I was finishing the novel, and everything that had been abstract to me during the first 5 years of reading the book became real and incredibly pressing and at my door for the 2 years that I spent finishing it.
Oh, I can imagine. And how about you, Charlotte? What was the inspiration for Once There Were Wolves?
Yeah, so I guess I had been inadvertently writing about climate change for a few years before I started writing Wolves, working on my first novel, Migrations, which, like Rebecca's novel, it's a story set in the very near future, but during what I'd imagined the peak of the extinction crisis would look and feel like. All the animals had died or were the last of their kind. And that story was about how it would feel to be here alone. So I guess I'd been immersed at that point for years in thinking about what was happening to our planet and the creatures we share it with. So I was unwittingly primed, I guess, to be on the lookout for stories in that space that kind of cried out to me or grabbed me, which is what happened when I first read an article about Pando, the trembling giant, which is the oldest and largest living organism on the planet. It weighs 600 tons, and some scientists think that it could be 1 million years old. So it's a forest of quaking aspen trees, except that it's not a forest. It's actually one tree, which is all connected by this giant root system under the ground. And each of the tree shoots are genetically identical, like clone trees. And it's 1 million years this beautiful thing has been alive, and now it's dying because of human impact. So I don't know, I kind of felt really overwhelmed at the thought of this and what we're doing to it, which is just the story of so many things on this planet. But the article also stated that there was a really simple and elegant way of solving this problem and saving this amazing forest, and that would be to reintroduce wolves into the landscape. And I just remember thinking, that wolves, that's very strange. And it launched me down this kind of rabbit hole of research, which in some ways, I guess, kind of completely changed the course of my life. This world of wolves and biodiversity, forests, the interconnectedness of everything, of all of us, was so kind of fascinating and rich and just ripe with story, because the final note in the article was also that despite this kind of beautiful, simple conclusion, it would never happen because the farmers in the area wouldn't allow it. So I kind of immediately knew I had to write this kind of, there was such vibrant color already in this story in my mind. I had to tell this story of a woman who was trying to do this, bring back wolves in order to save a forest, with a wider view of slowing climate change, but facing huge opposition from the locals and the people around her. I knew that there'd be a death, that there'd be this farmer, and the wolves would be getting blamed. And I knew that, there would need to be this woman who was kind of fiercely determined to save the creatures that she loved. And it sort of weirdly came to me all in about 15 minutes. And it was this which is not how my ideas usually come to me. They're like getting blood out of a stone. But this one was kind of fully formed, and I just had to then start the research.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know that about wolves until I read your book, and now I think about it all the time, about the interconnectedness of animals and the landscape, ever since I read your book. So you kind of given me a great segue into this next question. I'm really interested in talking about the idea of solutions in climate fiction. And to be really clear, I do not think that authors need to write towards solutions. We do not need to provide the solutions, but in a lot of climate themed novels, the characters are thinking about them, talking about them, and sometimes authors are writing towards solutions. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I'm curious about how you feel about the way your characters are thinking about solutions and how they're working through them, and how other, characters in both of your books have different views. That, like you were saying, Charlotte, the farmers weren't supportive of it, and Rebecca, in your book, there's a lot of opposition for various, economic or technology related reasons. So I'm curious about how you thought about that and how your characters think about solutions for different climate. I don't mean solutions for all of climate crisis, but for the projects that they're working on. Do you want to take that one, Rebecca?
Sure. When I was really deep in the weeds with the first draft of this book, I read Middlemarch for the first time, and I got to thinking about different egos and sort of delusions of heroism and the way that they intersect with each other, and our ego causes our downfall. And for me, the way that played out in this book is that Alex feels this terrible guilty tension that he should, well, really he should just abandon his ego in a sense, that he wants to create this incredible solution, but he wants to be the one to do it. And if he could let go of wanting to be the one to do it, but that kind of competitiveness is necessary in academia to get funding. Even though the fact that he's working alone, the fact that he's working solo is really fictionalized. All scientists work with other scientists. But wanting your lab to win is part of it. And it's because it's so linked to funding. And that can be academic funding or government funding. In my book, it's what we see increasingly, which is that big tech funds projects that they find sexy. And that tension between company science and academic science and where the money comes from and how that changes the outcomes and how that changes the applications, that became really thorny and thrilling to me. And I see it in my own life. You know, I live in Silicon Valley and work with a lot of good people who work for bad people, and see how this happens. So when I think about solutions in my characters and solutions in climate fiction, what I really want to see is all of those obstacles that are mostly money and politics that are in the way of the solutions, and how those characters succeed or fail in keeping on despite those.
No, that's a really good point. And in, you know, talking about obstacles, Charlotte, one of the things I really admired about your book is that you treat the locals, the farmers, with so much dignity in their opposition. You don't paint them as caricatures or as evil when they oppose the wolves being reintroduced, because it's going to change the way they live in some way, or they're afraid it will. So I'm interested in how you approach that, because I thought you did that. You gave them so much dignity, and I really admired that.
Yeah, well, you know, of course, I think my dad's a farmer, so it's easy for me to kind of look at how I guess the burden of rewilding falls unfairly on the people in rural landscapes, more so than it does on urban people. So it's easy to kind of say, you know, we should be doing all of this, but then there are people who will have to do it, and there are people who will have to, you know, face more extreme pressures on an already difficult way of life. So, and I think that just in terms of, you know, there's no point for me in trying to create a sense of division in this world of complex climate issues. There's no point in trying to lay blame on normal everyday people. We can lay blame on the billionaires, but we don't need to be laying blame on normal people. We need to be focusing on cooperation, and I always try to, you know, put that into my work and write towards a sense of togetherness, because I just think, you know, and as you sort of mentioned about solutions and the responsibility we have to provide solutions, that's really difficult. You know, we don't always know what those solutions are. I know in my first novel, Migrations, I didn't have any solutions, but what I do always try to have is an active protagonist. And in Wolves, I think, you know, she needed to be kind of fighting for something. She needed to be doing something. And you don't have to look far to find people who are actively trying to save this world. So it wasn't hard to write a story about an active protagonist with a solution, and to kind of, you know, not demonize anyone. It's just, there's no point.
No, thank you for that. I agree completely. So I feel like you're always giving me a really excellent segue to what my next question is going to be. I'm interested in what you think about hope when we talk about climate, because I think that there's kind of, I've done, you know, panels and had a lot of conversations with authors about it. And I know that some authors very strongly believe that if you only write towards hope, that you're sugarcoating difficult realities. And there's some really difficult stuff out there, and we can't pretend it's not real. And then there's the other writers I've talked to who adamantly are about hope. And if we don't have hope, why are we bothering to write, and what are we fighting for? I also don't think we live in, it's not a binary. You don't have to live in either hope or despair. We're somewhere in between. But I'd love to hear what you think. If you want to start with that one, Charlotte, and how you think about hope for yourself, for your characters, and for the wolves even.
Yeah, and that's totally connected into that idea of solutions, isn't it? I think it's always been very important to me to write towards a sense of hope. And I think I did that with it was a natural inclination towards it. I don't want to depress myself any more than I need to. And I mean, I definitely do, because it's a very dark space to inhabit for long periods of time. But I think that's why it's important to push through to a hopeful space. So, that was what I always did, just for my own survival, really, and for mercy for the readers, I think. But lately I've been thinking more about why that is, and the responsibility of storytellers who tackle climate change. And I've come to believe very deeply that to write about our world as though, well, as Jonathan Franzen has recently put it, we're in the end times and there's no use in even trying. That's wrong. That's not true. It's not only wrong, it's lazy, it's self-absorbed. That is a privileged, entitled, rich person's attitude to a problem that won't affect them. It is absolute rubbish to say that there's no hope and no point in trying. There are people all over the world who are fighting with everything that they have, and it is helping. This is not a lost cause. And to say that it dishonors them in the extreme, I think it's also incredibly disrespectful to the people who are already being adversely affected. It's disrespectful to all our beautiful animal species, and it's really disrespectful to our children. How dare people say that we shouldn't have hope for our kids? That we should just kind of roll over and give up and leave them to suffer. I just find that, deplorable. And as you can see, I'm quite passionate about it. I don't mean to kind of, get too up in arms about it, but I will always kind of write towards hope, because I think hope energizes us. And what we need most now is the energy to act, all of us. Don't listen to people saying that this is the end times and there's nothing more we can do. It's not true.
Well, you're energizing me just listening to you talk about it. I love that. I also in the writing towards hope side of the equation, and I loved hearing you speak, because I think your passion comes through in your writing, and I think we need these stories, because they it moves me to read it. It moves me to hear you speak about it, and those small connections that you're making with your readers are inspiring people. Both of you. So I would love to hear Rebecca, how you feel about this idea of seeking hope or finding hope, conveying messages of hope.
Well, I think my feelings about it are really attached to what Charlotte said about having an active protagonist, and that in my fiction and also in my life and what I do to try to fight climate change, and you have to have an active protagonist, and you have to be an active protagonist. And hope, when I encounter in art, in any kind of art, any media, hope without action, hope that doesn't feel earned, or hope that doesn't come with action, including sacrifice, it's incredibly false. And that infuriates me, because I think that is another way of encouraging people to roll over and accept what we have been told is, by some, is inescapable at this point, and by others is not a big deal. Those are the two messages that allow us to avert our eyes, or to have what I think of as empty hope, which is just like a scented candle, we're not changing anything. And so I had this really odd experience writing the end of my book that is very specifically about what is and isn't hope and how we feel about it. I worked on this book for years and years, and I rewrote the ending a lot of times. And the ending in the book, in the final version of the book, is the right ending. I'm going to try to talk about this without giving anything away. I think I can. The ending in the book is the ending that is the right one for those characters. And when I read it, I felt a surge of hope, or when I wrote it, I felt a surge of hope and energy. And I knew that it was true to them, because that's what that does to you as a fiction writer. You get a surge of hope and energy when you are true to your characters. But you know how sometimes like you have a conversation with someone and you feel good about it, and then half an hour later you're like, what did she mean by that? Like you just sort of, something sounds a little different. There's something you didn't capture when you were in it. That happened to me with the ending that I wrote for my own book, where it acquired a completely different tone to me over time. That is in many ways a rebuke to the characters in the book who failed to act, or the characters in the book who rolled over or gave up or wanted empty hope. And that rebuke is like, I mean, this is my universe and I own it and it's mine, but it's sort of chilling to me. I think that was like my unconscious coming through or something. And what I mean to say is that we crave hope so strongly that it might pour out of us. But if it's not backed up by the action on the other side of it, it's nothing.
Oh, I love, you guys are both inspiring me so much. I really appreciate the conversations. Excuse me. So something else that's kind of like, I guess the other side of hope maybe is talking about climate anxiety, which I think is fueling why so many novels are coming out with themes about climate. And in your books, there's different, your characters, both of you, your characters are dealing with personal crises and personal traumas that aren't necessarily all related to climate. They're their own personal stories and relationships and histories, but they're intersecting with the climate and the way, based on what they're doing in their life, watching what's going on in the world around them. In Rebecca's book, that they are up in a space station and knowing that these horrible things are going down on Earth, but not being able to actually get a day-to-day update. So that's anxiety inducing. And in Charlotte's book, Inti, the main character, is so intimately engaged with the wolves that she loves them. So she's very close to her subject. So there's all these places for anxiety, personal anxiety, climate anxiety, and the intersection of them. So I'd love to hear about how you were working through that when you were developing these characters. Before I invite you to answer, though, I want to remind our audience that we would love to have questions. I can't see what the questions are right now, so there might be a whole bunch of them in there, and I don't know. But we would, if you want to put questions in the chat, we're going to get to those in a few minutes. We'll try to get to a couple. But so going back to this idea of anxiety and how it connects your characters to the environment. You want to start with that one, Rebecca?
Sure. I mean, I think that the climate fiction, the fact that climate fiction has emerged in the last, how many years do you think? 3 years, 5 years?
I've been talking about it that long, yeah.
Yeah, ascended from, sort of a subgenre of speculative fiction into, it's a genre. I mean, all my panels are climate fiction panels. And I think it's because this is pressing, and it's pressing in different areas of our brains and our lives, and it's intersecting with the decisions that we make and our families in all of these ways that it didn't 10 years ago, when it was easier to avert your eyes because your sensory experience day to day was not reflecting climate crisis in progress. I think that if the climate crisis affects our sort of larger societal anxiety, it doesn't do it enough. And that was fuel, so to speak, for me finishing this book. My work generally is unsettling. I don't have great sweeping solutions. I have unease. And if my book can do anything, I'm sorry to say, I want everyone's climate anxiety to be just a little bit worse, so that we can act together in the small ways that you can do every day and in larger ways collectively, to do something productive with that anxiety.
Yeah, it's productive use of our anxiety. How about you, Charlotte? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it, actually. And when you asked that question, Julie, my immediate thought was, I think probably the reason we write about not just climate anxiety, but personal griefs and traumas and losses alongside that sort of bigger world loss is because I suppose I've always thought of it as a means of self-protection and survival to carry on. Life carries on currently. Even while this madness is happening, it's very easy to become apathetic and to sort of switch off from things and to just focus on our kind of internal world and our personal kind of wounds and woes. And I think a book about anything else would not feel true, because we are still kind of, self-absorbed creatures. But I really like what Rebecca says about needing to heighten that anxiety and needing to kind of not turn away. I think, we live in a very frightening time. It's strange. It is very easy to switch off as a survival tactic. There's grief everywhere we look. We write about the things that frighten us. We write about the things that break our hearts. So it's no wonder we're writing about this issue at the moment, and it's becoming more and more popular. But, for some of us, it's a pervasive fear. For others, it's day-to-day impacts on our lives. It's actual physical impacts on the way we live. It's kind of, it's not a future problem. This is actually happening now in ways that we can see and we can't ignore. But we have to be brave. I think one of the ways that we be brave is that we tackle these things head on. We don't turn away. We heighten that anxiety, like Rebecca's saying. I know that writing fiction novels is not, in the great scheme of things, going to save the world, and I know that I'm not doing enough. None of us are doing enough, but I do believe that stories have power, even just to start conversations, to get people thinking. The more we think, the more we talk, the more power we have to turn this tide. So, people will keep writing about it, hopefully.
No, I love that. And I was, your answers made me think a lot when we talk about anxiety. I guess, just as a biological response, it's, nature's way of telling us to be afraid, to be alert and to find answers. And so, by prodding our anxieties, you are doing something. We're all trying to contribute to the conversation. And if we're like ratcheting up someone's anxiety a little bit more to do a little bit more, then it's, it is serving a role. And, fiction, I believe that writing is a part of activism. It's, I'm not an activist. I do things I try to do well, but writing is my form of activism when it comes to climate. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing that maybe you might feel, do you feel that way? Do you feel that your work is a form of activism?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to know what to do sometimes. We do feel very powerless. I feel small all the time in the face of this huge issue. And I feel just endlessly frustrated that the people who do have the power are just willfully kind of driving us into hell. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what I can do with my life, but I do know that I can write books. So I will keep writing books and trying to kind of make some sort of change in that way.
Yeah. How about you, Rebecca?
Well, when I finished this book, I mean, I told you about that weird experience that I had with the ending, and it felt, a review or a question that had been put to me by the characters in my book. What are you going to do? What else can you do something? Then stand up and do something. And I think also because of that, all of that time I had spent on a space station in my mind left me with this like incredible, like insatiable hunger to do earthly things, to do earth things. And I'd always been a garden person, but I got involved. I started reading Doug Talamy about the national parks, Homegrown National Parks Project, which encourages everyday people, anybody with the tiniest little patch of land, to garden with keystone native plants that basically will raise caterpillars. Become a caterpillar rancher in your backyard or your front yard or your sidewalk strip or your stoop, so that you can generate biodiversity. And the other thing that does, and I'm incredibly passionate about this and it has taken over my life, is that it slowly changes the aesthetic of beauty. And when I think about the particular climate crisis that, as I see it around me, a lot of it could be helped tremendously by changing and shifting standards of beauty, and what we think of as aesthetics in our landscapes and in our gardens, in the same way that the standards of beauty and aesthetics and positivity have changed for like how women look, even since I was in middle school. I think about the great strides that one by one people made in changing a culture little by little, by making an example and helping other people do the same. And anyway, I became really passionate about that. And that was the action that was waiting for me on the other side of this book. Yeah, I totally lost my mind over it. And now native plants are all I think about.
And there's a lot more caterpillars in your neighborhood, I bet.
Yeah.
That's great. So I'm going to bring this back to the beginning of our conversation a little bit and thinking about those Hollywood movies that are not representing climate. One of the things that I had read, one of the producers that was interviewed in this article, it said something about how that she was committing to by 2030 that 50% of scripts would have a reference to climate in it by 2030. And it seemed like a big goal to her. And I just was like losing my mind thinking like 2030, only half of them. And then I was reading another article that was simultaneously saying, which I love this, that that fiction that isn't including climate in some way, in some reference point, that's the science fiction. That if you're not addressing climate in some way, that's the science fiction, which I thought that was an interesting twist because, like, you had said, Rebecca, it's as a genre, it's coming into its own, or as a category or subgenre, however you want to call it. It's because we're thinking about it, we're talking about it, we want to see it reflected in our culture and the way we talk about it. So I am excited to think that some of these brilliant novels are going to end up on the screen. And I think I'm right. Am I right that maybe there might be a film coming at some point from you, Charlotte? Is that right?
Fingers crossed. I've sold the rights, so it's being developed at the moment with Sunny March, which is Benedict Cumberbatch's production company in England, and Claire Foy is attached to produce and star. They've got a director and a writer on board, and I think they're working away on a script at the moment. It's very difficult to get movies financed, but fingers crossed, it would be so amazing. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think, I guess Hollywood, it's always just been a bit of it's escapism, isn't it? That's what I guess we once wanted from film and TV, and I think climate change has just been a bit of a taboo in the past. It's either boring or it's depressing, and that's how people thought of it. But I'm really hoping that we can change that, because it does not have to be either of those things. Yeah, let's bring it onto our screens and generate, conversations in that way. That would be amazing.
I'd like to see more superhero movies about reintroducing wolves.
Yeah, totally.
That would be fantastic. I love that. Are there other books that either of you have read that have climate themes that you would love to see, either on as developed as a series or a movie?
I would really love to see Damnation Spring by Ash Davidson adapted. as you were talking, you and Charlotte were talking earlier about Charlotte's writing about the farmers and how they're human characters and actors. Everyone's doing their best. Damnation Spring, I thought, was a really interesting book because it's told from the perspective of the loggers in Oregon who are just trying to feed their families, and they have a way of life, and these decisions were not theirs. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. How about you, Charlotte? Is there anything you'd like to see on the screen?
Well, I was thinking, I don't know if this is a climate change novel exactly, but it's definitely a novel about nature and our connection to nature and how we should be nurturing and cherishing that. And it's The Overstory by Richard Powers, I think. You know, I don't
Surely
think
that's happening, right?
yeah, you would imagine
I
so.
mean, I love it.
Yeah, it must be. I can't imagine it would be an easy film, but I think it could make a really great TV series because it's very sprawling and there's a lot of characters, and you know, I think, yeah, I reckon that could be fun.
Well, I would love to see both of your books on the screen, and we can keep these conversations going. And I see Jen is back with us with some questions. So thank you, both of you. This was such a great conversation. I feel like there were so many quotable moments. I'm gonna have to go back and watch the rewind of it because I loved everything you guys had to say, and it's been such a pleasure talking with you today.
Oh, Julie, thank you so much. Great questions. You've been amazing.
Yeah, really, really a pleasure. I'm looking forward to more. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you all. And we've got quite a few questions, which is why I wanted to come back a minute or two early, because I wanted to try to get to everyone's. Plus, you just mentioned The Overstory, and that was a comment from someone that was sort of a question. And I wanted to see if there was something in there that we should piggyback on. Juliana had said, I wonder if each of you had read The Overstory. Sounds like you have. Which I read as a love story to trees and the planet, and therefore found it hopeful despite the devastation. Did you read it that way? And can one find one in the midst of devastation? Can one find one in the midst
Oh,
of
she
devastation?
added later, can one find hope, I think. In the midst
Yes, yes, exactly. So I don't know if you want to add a little bit to your Overstory piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely how I read it as well. The loving way that he wrote about trees was kind of a revelation to me, because it made human something that we often don't think of as human, or maybe human's not the right word, but it gave worth and value to something that we often are quick to disregard. You know, we think of trees as sources of material for us, really. Just the way we think of a lot of things on this planet as tools for us, material for us. I think it's really important to shift how we think about the living things that we share this planet with, and start to think of them as living things in their own right that deserve to be here and not kind of constantly just used by us. So that was, you know, I really enjoyed the way that he looked at trees in that, and that was kind of maybe a little bit of inspiration in how I started to think about wolves, to give them a voice, to give them characters, to try to anthropomorphize them so that we can connect with them. And I think I read someone else saying that if a tree is an it, you can cut it down, but if it's a they, them, he, she, you can't cut it down. So yeah, that's that. Yep. And I think he does do a great job of offering hope in desolation.
I would add that if you loved The Overstory, I would encourage everyone to read Suzanne Simard's memoir. I think it came out last year, called Finding the Mother Tree. The main character, the character who broke all of our hearts in The Overstory, is based on Suzanne Simard. And her memoir of devastation, her part in the logging industry growing up as she was a young forester, or young forestry student scientist, and then her decades of tireless work to save mother trees and to understand mother trees, what a mother tree is, you know, in the face of incredible obstacles in politics and the money that want to avert everyone's eyes and say, this is not happening, this is not a problem, get this little lady out of here where everybody was fine before she showed up. Really an incredible book, and really it's that hope that's grounded in action, in devastation. Yeah.
So in our Q&A, we have a question for you, Rebecca. Patricia Debuse is asking, what is that beautiful futuristic backdrop you're in front of?
Sure. So
She's not the only one, so I wanted to make sure we got to that.
Yeah, so I've been using this background for my book events because this is an image of this, what's called the Stanford Torus. In I think 75 or so, NASA and Stanford, and I live right near Stanford, NASA and Stanford hosted a conference, like a sort of futurist thinking conference, where they asked people to propose and illustrate designs for space stations. And what I find so incredible about this, when I first saw it, and it became a very, this is a very grand version of a ring style space station that rotates to simulate gravity, which is the kind of space station in my book, which is why it's up here. But the artist who made this space station, this art, is trying to make it look like Earth. And look at these lakes, these trees. And to me, there's something like really poignant and even a little heartbreaking about that. Because I can't read this as, is this place a place to recreate Earth when Earth cannot be inhabited? Or is this an extra Earth type situation, a spare Earth? Any way I look at this, or just a storybook version where nothing is wrong, any way I look at this image, I find really emotionally charged. But it's also just up here because it's a spinning space station, like the one in my book.
I've got a question for Charlotte. The audiobook of Once There Were Wolves is so good, in caps. And part of the reason is because the narrator moves so seamlessly between Australian and Scottish accents. Have you listened to it, or did you have a hand in choosing that narrator?
Yeah, sort of. Basically, the audio team sent me a God, I've lost the word. An audition. An audition from Saskia, who's the narrator, and I thought she was amazing. Normally they send you a few different audition tapes, but they just sent this one, and I loved her and told them to go for it. So, you know, just okaying it, basically, not really having any hand in it. But the funny thing is, I can't listen to any of my audiobooks. I find it mortifying. I haven't listened to any of them. I can barely pick up my own books and look at them once they're published. So I have heard that it's beautiful and that she does an amazing job, so I'll have to just take your word for it.
I actually listened to them in audio, and they are excellent. So, but you're in good company, because earlier today, Elizabeth Strout said that she couldn't bear to listen to her books either.
There's just something embarrassing. It's like listening to yourself talk on a recording. It's like, ooh, is that what my voice sounds like? Gross.
Jennifer has a question for Charlotte and Rebecca. Do you think that any and all future books you write will have shades of climate change in the pages as an inescapable part of our worlds now? Or do you think you will step away from those stories, whether because you have a different story to tell, or you need to give yourself the space to tell a story without those pervasive issues?
Well, I know for my part, I'm working on my third novel at the moment, and it's definitely back into the same same heavy space. I guess the thing for me is it's always been a rule that I write the books I want to read. I write what I'm passionate about. I write what I care about, what offers meaning to me in the exploration. So at the moment, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I care about. I'm tackling as Rebecca mentioned earlier at the very start of this panel, she talked about the anxiety of bringing a child into this world. And I think there's a lot of us that are kind of dealing with that. I've just had my first baby. And so I'm thinking a lot about the disregard that this planet is showing our children, and what we can do about that. And so that's what my kind of next book is about. It's about raising children in a suffering, dying world, and how we raise them. And I think, I'm definitely facing fatigue around this, and kind of continuously needing to tackle these huge things. But when I feel fatigued, I sort of step away, and I always feel the pull to come back to it. So I think it will be a space that I continue to explore, and maybe not after this third one, maybe it won't be this kind of central focus, but I think, as you say, there will always be shades of it, because yeah, like we've mentioned, this is the hard reality now. It's, if we're writing fiction, there should be references to it.
I think that this book might have been more directly about the climate crisis than my next book will be, but I can't imagine writing any novels in the future that don't acknowledge reality. Maybe a couple of weeks ago, someone was asking me a question about cli-fi as a genre and its growing genre, and I said, sort of darkly, like, well, in 5 years we'll all be on the cli-fi panel. And they thought it was a dark joke, but if it's not acknowledging the climate crisis or even climate change in some way, is it historical fiction or is it fantasy? It's the sci-fi, as Julie said, as Julie quoted earlier in the panel. So yeah, I think that it's part of the environment that we are living in. And I was also going to tell you, Charlotte, that I don't know, congratulations on your new baby.
Thank you.
Richard Powers' new book, Bewilderment, very much about, it's really intense, and maybe wait a few years, for all these things that you don't want new mothers to read. Yeah. So wait a few years, yeah.
Oh God, okay, good tip. I've got it on my bookshelf, so maybe I will wait.
Yeah, I'd also recommend the New Wilderness. Have you read The New Wilderness, which is also about raising children in an altered climate future? It's a really beautiful book.
Okay, great tip. Thank you. I need these, Rex.
Laura's asking, are there organizations / activists fighting climate change that are close to your hearts that you'd recommend people to check out or get involved with?
Well, I already mentioned Doug Talamy's Homegrown National Parks project, and that has been really a galvanizing force in my life. And because of reading his work, he's an entomologist based in Delaware who writes about preserving biodiversity on half of the earth, which is what we need to save species from extinction and preserve biodiversity, by treating our front yards, backyards, tiny yards, townhouse yards, not like golf courses, but like national parks. And I have been able, because of that, to create all of these little pockets, both in my own space, in my neighbor's space, in my neighbor's neighbor's space, and some community space. I'm just trying to create these little islands that touch each other. And then one day a monarch shows up in your yard and you feel the triumph of 1,000 angels, and do more.
Yeah. Well, I just love the World Wildlife Fund. I just think they do such amazing work. I always try to kind of give as much as I can to them, because it's, they're at the coalface. They're up against this kind of massive extinction loss that we're facing. And, in my home country, they try to tackle, we've got one of the worst extinction rates in the world, which is staggering, because we also have some of the most richly biodiverse landscapes and environments. And so it's just like, I don't know, it's really shameful. but the World Wildlife Fund really try and tackle, you know, we've lost so much wildlife from the bushfires that we've been having and the floods, and things that are undeniably caused by climate change. And our poor koalas are, you know, on the verge of extinction very, very, very soon. And yeah, they just do really great work rewilding, planting, trying to kind of rehabilitate all these poor injured animals. And yeah, so I try to support them as much as I can.
Julie, you're welcome to answer this one as well if you have any organization you'd like to call out.
Yeah, I've been involved with Climate Reality, which is was founded by Al Gore, and I've been trained as a climate reality speaker. And what I love that organization because they give you a lot of tools for how to speak about climate. I do a lot of public speaking about the intersection of you know, climate and art, not just fiction. And having the tools to go out and talk to community groups, to schools, universities, museums about this, to me has been really empowering, because they emboldened me to have a voice when I didn't think I had one when it comes to talking about climate. You know, I farm a piece of land, but I was thinking, who am I to try to educate other people about it? But this organization, it gives voice to people who want the voice and who want to become more active in, you know, in sharing climate narratives. So I've been a big fan of Climate Reality.
Amazing.
And I see actually in the chat, people are putting some of their own recommendations of many things, organizations, books, films. So thank you, audience, for chiming in, because it's great to hear about more opportunities. So, and I realize I don't think I got to everyone's question, but we are at the end of our time. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us. You're joining us from so many different places. I mean, as much as I love our in-person festival, this is really the benefit of going online, that we can do a panel with someone in Australia, California, Scotland, and Newburyport, and have this great discussion, and a whole audience of people who are probably calling in as well from all over, who are chiming in with their thoughts. So thank you so much for making this a success. I have totally loved this panel. And I, based on the comments, I think the folks in the audience have too. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the audience. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.